Hello, World Journal. I'm excited to start our recorded seminar today. Just as a reminder, this is recorded, so I will be covering a lot of content. But if you do have questions, we are offering a initial free consultation so that you could bring your questions with you to our consultation meeting if you need to. Just to introduce myself, my name is Jenny Wheatley. I'm very excited to be presenting specifically today about what you need to be thinking about beyond the perfect GPA. So once again, my name is Jenny Wheatley. I'm the president here at Admission Masters. I know a lot of students and parents are probably going to have a lot of questions. Unfortunately, I won't be speaking in Mandarin today, but I will be covering a lot of the content in English. My seminar PowerPoints will have a lot of words and concepts in there. And that way, if you are watching this recording, you can go back and kind of check out the specifics of what I said. Normally, I don't put a lot of words on my PowerPoint presentations, but because this is a recorded version and you might not catch everything that I said, I did put a lot of content in there as well. So without further ado, since I don't have a lot of time, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start with just diving into what three main things that I'll be covering today. And generally, I am going to be showing you guys a bit of data about how competitive college admissions has really gotten. This has been the most competitive cycle in admissions history, but to be honest, I feel like I say this almost every year. I say that, it's always been really competitive. It's been competitive nationally and specifically here in California. So I'll be covering that today. We'll also talk about what admissions officers actually see. We're going to go inside the committee room. I'll give you guys a brief overview of what the admission officers do when they're looking at your applications and how they're viewing that and what changes there have been. And then, of course, strategies, right? How do I build the most standout application? How do I stand out? What are some of the non-obvious things that admitted students have done? And what are some things that I could do to get admitted into the colleges that I want to get into? So let's get started by talking about just how competitive this cycle has been. I'm going to show you guys some numbers and what these numbers mean and the data means, so you guys can dive into that and kind of understand the level of competition. So and this is just this cycle, okay? So class of 2026 for high school students, so the seniors who had just graduated, which is also the class of 2030 in the incoming class. So every Ivy League school has now admitted under 9%. Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Princeton, they all admitted, fewer than 4% of the applicants that applied, as you guys can see here. And early decision and early action now fills about 70% of the seats at a lot of elite colleges. So if you are not preparing to do early decision or early action, you are in a big disadvantage applying for regular admissions, which just means that you need to start preparing earlier and getting things, your resume and your major and your leadership and your impact and your community service, like all of those things need to be ready to do and take advantage of early decision and early action. And once again, because 70% or more of seats are filled in early decision and early action rounds, it means that regular decision odds are really low, right? They can go as low as 1.5 to 3%, particularly for some of these universities that you see in the Ivy Leagues. I'm sure a lot of you guys already know this. And I think that a lot of students, when they're looking at the data, every year I look at data, right? I actually look at data maybe once every couple months. And as I look at data, I just see kind of the patterns that I'm about to show you right now. And the acceptance rates just getting lower and lower because obviously there's not too much that colleges can do to expand their seats, generally speaking. So we're going to dive into that a little bit in a moment. With that said, so why are numbers, acceptances, decreasing? And a lot of that is because the applicant pool keeps growing. More and more students are applying to colleges. More and more students are applying to more and more colleges. So this year, this admission cycle, as early as March 2026, looking at all the numbers, about 1.4 million if not more, distinct first-year applicants have applied nationwide. Again, it goes up year after year. 9.4 million total applications submitted. That's a 5.5% rise over the prior cycle. About an average of 6.5 to 7 applications that students have applied to for individual schools, which is up from the year before, and 6 years straight since the 2021-2022 application cycle of rising applicant volume. Generally, what this means is more students are applying to more schools than ever before, and that has been the case every year, unfortunately, as you can see for the past 6 years for sure. And that shrinks the admission rate everywhere, right? Even at colleges that really haven't changed their standards, they haven't really changed, their GPA, isn't necessarily higher for you to get admitted into. It's not like they're looking for more leadership positions per se, but the standards naturally rise because of the number of applicants and the sheer number of students who are applying to these universities. And honestly, it's just as fierce at home. And by home, I mean California, because obviously I'm doing the seminar for a lot of you guys who are in California for World Journal. So looking at numbers now, 102,000 California high school students admitted, just California high school students admitted to the UC-wide fall 2026 school year. And that is a system-wide record. Although, as I said again, we talk about records and it's kind of been beaten every year. 150,000 first-year and transfer applicants to UC Berkeley alone just this cycle. 10.5% was UC Berkeley's freshman admit rate, which is now the most selective UC campus, and UCLA right at 10.8. If you look at Ivy League admissions, I just showed you earlier, like Cornell was at the highest with 8%. UCs are not far off from that. And that is scary, right? That brings a lot of concerns. I think even a decade ago, I've been doing this job for 17 years, and even a decade ago, a lot of times UCs were kind of California in-state students and families like safety net, right? They were like, okay, I'm going to try to go to privates, but at least I can fall back on the UCs. And that's not the case anymore. A record applicant pool means a record number of highly qualified California students are being turned away from our own flagship campuses. UCs were created for California in-state students, right? It was a bunch of colleges within California that was meant to serve students and families in California. But obviously that's not necessarily the case anymore, even though UC still try to, make sure that they are admitting as many California in-state students as possible. It's just getting more and more competitive. So now UC admissions requires the same strategy and intentional strategy as private school admissions, which again, even a decade ago wasn't necessarily the case. So UCs are still very holistic review. They are going to look at everything, including your GPA, your extracurricular activities, and just the competition in and of itself for UCs have just become more and more difficult in general. So the three areas that are driving the squeeze, this really difficult acceptance rate and low acceptance rates, is number one, the early decision arms race. So there's more and more students that are applying early, and 70% of those seats are being taken in early admissions. And so that leaves a really low, hyper-competitive pool and a low admit rate for regular decision applicants. So if you don't know what early decision is, just so you know, early decision is basically an early admission strategy that if you get admitted to the school, you have to go no matter what. And you can only select one school to do early decision to. The deadline for early decision is November 1st of your senior year, which means you really do need to prepare and have everything prepared in order to make and do early decision. If your GPA is not ready, your SAT or ACT scores are not ready, you don't have quite the leadership or the extracurricular activities that you need to be a competitive applicant in the early decision pool, then you're running behind, you're falling behind, right? I also say academics because if you apply to the early decision or even early action deadlines, your first semester of your senior year grades are not included in that application. So what goes into the application in terms of academics is only up to the second semester of your junior year, and particularly what you might do the summer after your junior year, like if you take some community college courses or classes outside of your high school, that could potentially be included into your transcript, but your first semester of your senior year grades are not included. So you have to be strategic about early decision, because yes, while it is more advantageous in most cases, if you are not a prepared student and you don't have the GPA or the academics to be able to be competitive in the early decision rounds, it might not be a good idea for you. You might be a student that really needs that first semester of your senior year grades in order to be more competitive in the academic and the applicant pool. So that, I think, is something you need to be strategic about. But generally speaking, if you are prepared and you are ready, doing early decision and early action can increase your chances of getting admitted to the school, because so many of the seats are already being taken in those early rounds. There's more applications per student, so more and more students are applying to more and more colleges, which is why it's making your acceptance rate look lower, right? At the end of the day. And lastly, grade inflation flattens the GPA. So what does this mean? Basically, what admission officers have been seeing, especially in the past couple of years, is that most students who get admitted to top schools, their GPA unweighted GPA sits at about a 3.9 to 4.0. So that's either a perfect straight A student or maybe 1B, like in one semester of their high school career. So because there are more students with really good GPAs, right? Either perfect GPAs or off by 1B in one semester, GPA stops being the differentiator, right? In the past, if we saw those valedictorians and top tier students, right? And when I say in the past, I mean like 7 to 8 years ago, that was a differentiating factor, right? Because there weren't as many students that were achieving that. Now, the majority of students who get admitted to these colleges are achieving that. And so it's hard for the GPA to be the differentiating factor, which is why today I'm going to talk about other things that you can do to differentiate yourself. So, a quote that I live by: GPA gets you in the room, it no longer gets you the seat. Okay, so at the most selective schools, the majority of applicants already have the near perfect academic record. And this isn't just a GPA. It means mostly fives on their AP exams. It means, close to 1600 SAT or 36 ACT. I would say most students who are applying to these top tier universities are at the very minimum hitting a 1540 or 1550 on their SAT and a 35 on their ACT, right? So that level in and of itself is just getting more competitive. Admission officers stop asking, is this student capable? Because nowadays, college admissions recognizes that when they look at a student's GPA and they look at their test scores, for the most part, they are going to be capable enough to do well academically at their university. But now they're asking a different question. They're asking, who is this person? What are they going to add to our campus that nobody else in this applicant pool is going to bring? Right? So that uniqueness factor. It's not just, are you capable and can you do well at my university academically? It's, who are you? And are you going to bring something to my campus that nobody else will? Right? And that no one else in this applicant pool will bring. So what do admission officers actually see? I'm going to kind of show you guys how it looks in the admissions committee and generally the process of that so that you can have a little bit of background of how this happens. I will tell you, majority of the time, admissions committees run this way, but of course, there are some universities that are different, that they run things slightly differently. But generally speaking, at the most selective schools, there is multiple readers. The first reader spends about 8 to 12 minutes per your application. So your entire academic and personal story has to land fast. Like if they look at it and it just seems very generic, there's nothing that really stands out, there's nothing that catches their eye in those 8 to 12 minutes, that could be a determining factor for that reader, right? But generally, the review process is holistic and it's contextual. They're going to look at your GPA, the rigor, the activities, but they're going to read that against the actual environment of your school and the specific high school that you go to. So they're not comparing, a student, in California that goes to a public school, and comparing that. So, for example, they're not comparing like an Irvine Unified School District school student to someone that lives in Idaho that has a very different environment, that doesn't have a lot of the similar course offerings or extracurricular opportunities. They're comparing you against what is available at your high school, and how other students at your high school do, and seeing the comparison to that. So it is contextual, okay? And most students who get admitted are actually decided in the committee rounds. Committee rounds is when there is a room full of admission officers and they're voting on the student that they want to admit. It's not decided by one reader. That does happen, but it's a very small portion of applicants who do actually get decided by one reader. The majority, especially of admitted students, are decided in committee. So what happens in committee? Your file needs, I say champion, but they need an admission officer and representative who read your application to advocate for you, right? To advocate for your application in front of other people who have never met you before. I, as an admission officer, will stand up in front of the committee and present to them what I feel like, why I feel like you, Jessica Lee, needs to be admitted to my university and why this student should get chosen over a different student. And then everyone raises their hand in the committee to vote on that particular applicant. And then readers also score your parts of your application separately. So your academics, your extracurriculars, your personal, sometimes athletics, sometimes other talents, they all score things separately. And because of that, a weak score in one area is difficult for even a strong overall file to offset. So what do I mean by this? You can have a strong extracurricular, a personal and athletic, and maybe another talent in your application. However, if your academics are low, right, that's not necessarily going to offset. Like, it's not really like a balance beam, right? It's like, oh, if one area is low and the other areas are really high, then I'm going to get admitted. It doesn't work like that. It actually needs to be really good all around. And I'm not talking about athletics specifically, but this is just an example. So why does this matter? If a reader needs a champion, right, an advocate to fight for your file in committee, then your application needs to give that person something memorable and specific to argue about you, right? It can't just be a list of accomplishments. It can't just be a summary about yourself. There has to be something memorable that an admission officer can be like, hey, this is why I feel like Jessica Lee should get admitted to our university in comparison to these other students, right? They should have something specific to say, and that's going to make you stand out amongst other applicants. You need to give them that, right? You need to give them that. And that's what we work on at Admission Masters. We want to make sure that every single student has something that can be championed about, right? That could be advocated about. So what is that called? That is called the spike. Okay. So one of the things that, what we do at Admission Masters is to really help students find the spike. And the spike, I would say, is really important because a lot of times I feel like students and parents try to build something well-rounded, right? They're like, I need to be really good at art and music. I'm going to have an art portfolio. I'm going to have a music portfolio. I'm going to have all of these things. But the reality is, it's not that's important, right? It's not that you're good at everything. It's that you're good at one thing or maybe two things. So the myth is, let's be well-rounded, right? I want to have one club per all of my interests. I want to do a little bit of everything. I'm going to be an officer, vice president, treasurer, secretary in like 8 to 10 different clubs. When you have something like this, it shows as capable, but it is too similar to other well-rounded applicants, right? And that's something that you need to keep in mind because if you sound the same as everyone else, then what is the admission officer going to champion about, right? What are they going to advocate to say that this is why Jessica Lee should be the one that gets admitted to the university? What is going to be the reason, right? And so we don't want to be well-rounded. What we want to do is create a spike, right? And what is a spike? A spike is some sort of unusual strength that is sustained for years, which means that you've been dedicated to it for a really long time. You need an admission officer to look at your application and say, we need this student. If we don't have the student, we're not going to build the perfect class, right? When an admission officer and a committee is trying to build a class, they're not trying to build everybody who can do everything, right? If they're just looking for a bunch of mediocre artists and a mediocre musicians, that doesn't really make their class diverse. What they're looking for is a class of specialists, things that students are really good at that is unique to them. A student who is really passionate about fashion history. I have a student right now who's really passionate about East Asian history and specifically pre-modern East Asian history, right? Someone who has a specialty, whether that be within a major or a talent, that's going to make you stand out. That is what admission officers want, and that's what they're looking for when it comes to building a spike. And I know I have students and parents all the time that are like, but what if we don't have a spike, right? I don't know what I'm talented in. We can find a spike and we can build it. I have students who build spikes around their major and something that they're really passionate about. I'll give you one pro tip. If you are a student right now that's really interested in medicine or pre-med, instead of just generally saying that I am interested in biology, right? For example, instead of saying that, what you should say, right, is that I am interested specifically in cancer or like diseases or diabetes, right? It's really important to kind of consider some of the things that I would really like students to understand is that at the end of the day, any biology student can say that they love biology in one way or the other, right? But not every biology student can say that they are really interested in breast cancer specifically or diabetes specifically, and really being able to delve into that and dive into that is really important. And so I'll show you that example in a little bit. So again, I know I'm showing a lot of words here, but it's because it's recorded and I want to make sure that you guys have the content. So how do I break out of the sea of sameness? Okay. Admission officers, they acknowledge reading a large number of applications from Asian American students, and they all have very strikingly similar profiles. They are good at violin or piano. Cello is another one, right? Tennis, golf. They do a bunch of math competitions. They're really interested in pre-med or computer science. They see this among Asian applicants a lot. That does not mean you need to abandon it. Okay. If you are a student that's like, but I've been doing piano for 15 years, like, you want me to quit piano? Absolutely not. You need to be the best at piano, but you don't need to give up piano. So if if you have one of these things, I just named a bunch of profiles that a lot of Asian American applicants have. If you are one of those students, you don't have to abandon it. You just need to make sure that you show a very personal version of that passion, not a generic version. Let me give you an example. There are way too many. In fact, I actually had a conversation with a Yale admissions officer, current Yale admissions officer, and they said 1 in 10, okay, 1 in 10 applicants that they look at, about half of them will have some sort of music experience, okay? And of the half of them, over 90% of them will be first chair of their school's orchestra, okay, or principal of their school's orchestra. So does being principal or, first chair in a school's orchestra make you stand out? No, because there's way too many section leaders. There's way too many first chairs and principals, right? But then how can I make that stand out? Well, if you are then using music to do other things, right? Yes, I am first chair. Yes, I am principal. I have that, just like other students who are musically talented. But I also won, 20 different international music competitions. I'm also using music as psychological therapy for neurodivergent children, right? I'm also, a part of an organization called Back to Bach, where I teach kids how to play music that come from underserved communities. I'm also refurbishing different string instruments so I can donate them to underserved communities. Like there has to be something deeper than just the fact that I'm a good performer, I am first chair, I am section leader, because doing that is not enough because there's too many students that do that. So the authenticity that comes beyond just being a really good performer or being being the section leader of an orchestra is the basic, right? It's the foundation. Building on top of that and making it more unique to you is really important. 2018 Harvard admissions trial revealed that Asian American applicants, despite the strongest academic and extracurricular ratings, were scored lower on a subjective personal rating. So I don't know if you guys remember, it might be before your time, but in 2018, Harvard went into a lawsuit because Asian communities felt like they were being unfair. Like, why is it that Asian applicants have the highest academic and extracurricular ratings, but they're not getting admitted to schools like Harvard? When they looked into it a little bit more, part of that was because they had a lower personal rating. That means voice, warmth, individuality in an essay, interviews, right? These are things that Asian American students were rated or scored low on. And so these are areas as Asian American students and applicants that we need to build, right? To make you stand out. So big thing when it comes to this voice part is to just make sure that the essay sounds like the student, the person, not over polished, not so that you can show a parent, a teacher, a consultant, but to make sure that you are leveraging your own voice. Okay, so building the standout application, what are some things that I can do to separate myself from other students and to be admitted? One thing that's really simple is that you should be committing to 2 to 3 activities, not 12 activities, right? Choosing a couple of activities that have the same through line, which means the same theme, the same major direction, some sort of impact that shows leadership initiative. That is actually better than having a variety. More is not better, okay? The value, the impact, and the depth of your activity is the most important. And then by senior year, your activities should show some sort of progression. I was a participant, then I became a contributor, and then I became a leader, and now I'm creating something for this club or organization that's going to outlast me and to be continuous, to keep this legacy and also the impact of this club for years to come, right? Building something that will outlast you. So I generally give my students this kind of timeline of like in 8th and 9th grade, you should explore your passions and the things that you really love that focuses and holds your interest. And then in 10th, 11th grade, you should be narrowing that down into real, tangible responsibilities and areas of focus. And then 11th and 12th grade, you should be leading, creating, publishing, doing something that shows tangible impact. Okay. That is the growth of that. So this is the example I was giving you earlier. Former Cornell admissions officer Nelson Urena notes that most files lack a project, experiment, portfolio, or endeavor that a student spent substantial time learning, tinkering, or creating. So instead of, I'm interested in biology, right, as an activity or in an essay, showing some sort of independent research project, a published paper, a working prototype, a community program, something that you built and ran that shows your depth and curiosity and your interest in a particular subject, that tangibility is going to go a long way. And yes, while, 2 or 3 month summer research opportunities are still valuable, I would say colleges really like to see the duration of especially research, right? Doing research for maybe 2 years, starting from your summer of your 10th grade and you continue to work with that professor all the way to your senior year is a bit more impressive, even though you you don't end up publishing something, it's a bit more impressive that you have that dedication and that commitment to work with someone and to continue the research process in the major direction you want to go into than just doing something for a month or two and having a published paper, right? That is not to say having a published paper is bad, okay? And that is not to say that doing a summer camp or a research opportunity that's only 2 to 3 months long is bad. Absolutely not. That still shows intellectual depth and curiosity. It just shows something that you built. I'm just saying if we were to compare, the longevity of research that you did with a professor versus a short-term research that you did that you published a paper for, sometimes the longevity of the research can outweigh the value of something that's shorter. Okay, winning recommendation letters, and I'm moving a little fast because I know I only have 30 minutes. So, winning recommendation letters. First of all, choose recommenders who know you as you, not just as a student in a classroom, right? Your character, not just someone who raises their hand all the time and has the highest grade in the class, but really your personality, your resilience, your compassion, your intellectual curiosity, your leadership, that type of stuff. You need to have recommenders that show that, right? Those soft skills. Because remember I mentioned earlier that those are characteristics that Asian American students are missing. Build relationships in your junior year because colleges do tend to like junior year rec letters. I do have a few students who have gotten into good schools that have 10th grade or 9th grade teachers, but those teachers have taught high level classes like AP level classes, and those teachers in 9th and 10th grade have been their club advisor. So they've really seen this student in both the academic and non-academic setting. Those cases are fine, but generally speaking, building relationships with teachers in your junior year by asking thoughtful questions, going to office hours, like letting the teacher really see your intellectual curiosity and your compassion and your willingness to learn before senior year is an important step to have a really strong recommendation letter. I will say what is more important in rec letters, the what? The content that is in the recommendation letter is more important than who wrote it. Okay, so who wrote it? The principal can write you a generic recommendation letter because the principal knows you and likes you. But if you had an AP World History teacher or an AP US History teacher who wrote a really excellent recommendation letter that made you stand out, that made you super impressive and showcases a lot of the tangible impact that you had in the classroom and your intellectual curiosity, that will be much more impressive than having a principal of your high school write a generic recommendation letter. Okay, so the what, the content is more important than the who. So that was just a summary. A specific detailed letter from a teacher who taught you for one semester will outperform a generic one from a teacher who's known the family for years. Okay, so the what is more important than the who. The other thing I wanted to mention is that schools are tracking your interest. If you haven't started this process yet, demonstrated interest is a really big part of college applications. So another strategy that you want to take is to open emails that you get from colleges, put them in, fill out the prospective student form and form on the school's website. If you go to information session, visit a representative at your school, signed up for an interview, all of those things are logged by colleges. And for some colleges, they actually factor it into their admissions decisions. I tell this to my students, if you are an early decision applicant and you have never visited the school or even did a virtual tour and information session, they're going to be like, why do you even want to come to our school? Right? So demonstrated interest is really important and you should start that early. The why us essays are really good opportunity for you to showcase specificity and your passion for the particular college and university and why you want to attend. Saying things like, oh, it's a beautiful campus or you have world-class faculty, that is very generic that you can write for any schools. You want to make sure that you're naming specific courses, professors, research lab, programs, and connect it to something that is already visible in your application. So it can't just be name dropping these things that you found on a website, but how that relates to the things that you're interested in and your experiences that you've had so far. Um, for schools that don't really track the interest, like the ones that are up here, a genuinely specific supplement still signals how much you love the school and how you did the homework to research the university. So if you haven't been doing this already, I would definitely start. I usually recommend my ninth and 10th grade students to start the process of researching colleges, going to virtual college tours and information sessions, and really tracking their interest and showcasing that and engaging with universities. So you want to do that early. The last little part is likability. Obviously, you need to be likable. Most files in the final round of that committee round, as I mentioned, have comparable grades, scores, and activities. So it really just comes down to simple human questions like, do I want this person in my dorm? Do I want them in my seminar? Do I want them in my dining hall? Is this someone that I feel like I can actively see on campus making a difference? Are they going to bring value to our campus, right? That's the human question that they ask at the very end. And that means you need to be likable. If they're like, nope, I would not want this student on campus, I would not want this student in my dining hall, then that is not going to be very valuable, right? At the end of the day. So everyone has the grades, the scores, and the activities. We want to be able to build other aspects that show the humanness behind who you are. And having a consistent voice throughout the essay, the activity descriptions, the interview, making sure that there's a lot of warmth and self-awareness is going to show that impression. Okay, so think about, does your application sound more like a resume with a list of accomplishments, or does it sound like a story that's personal, earnest, and authentic? Okay, so getting to the end here, 5 things you need to remember. This is the most competitive cycle on record nationally across the UC system. GPA and test scores are going to get you into the pool, but they're not going to decide who gets admitted. That's not going to decide who gets admitted. There's beyond that. Depth beats breadth. A real spike outperforms a long activity list every time. Authentic, specific voice is your highest leverage advantage in essays, letters, and interviews. And I'm a huge believer in the early bird gets the worm. Strategy has to start by ninth grade. The strongest files are built over time. They're not assembled in your senior year. Okay, so I know I usually do an hour seminars, but I try to cover as much as I can. We're here to build your standout application. We work with families around the world to bring and build standout applicants through branding, essay coaching, and road mapping. We are offering a complimentary consultation, so you can mention this World Journal seminar when you reach out to us. Our website and email address is here, but you're more than welcome to click on this QR code, which will give you a lot of other information, including our brochure, our YouTube channel, and things like that. So hopefully this was a lot of really good information. Once again, thank you again so much, World Journal, for allowing me to be here today. And I hope you guys have a rest of a great day. Bye, everyone.